Hello everybody and welcome to another virtual program with the National Portrait Gallery. Thank you so much for joining us in your lunch break today. We have a fantastic program lined up with one of our curators, Jo Gilmour, who's going to be taking us on a game or playing a game of chance with us today. But I'll explain a little bit more about that later. Thank you so much for all coming in to the Zoom chat. If some of you haven't actually joined us on Zoom before, it would be really terrific if you could keep your microphones muted, but your cameras on so that we can see your faces. And a big hello to our friends joining us on Facebook Live as well. We would really love it if you'd like to interact with Jo or I during the course of the program by putting your comments or observations or questions into the chat function in Zoom, or just commenting on the Facebook Live video, and we'll make sure that we try and get as many of those questions to Jo for you today and get some answers. It is not nighttime and I'm not standing out the front of the National Portrait Gallery. What a surprise. I think you're all used to the fact that we're streaming from various different places around Canberra and New South Wales at the moment, whilst we're on our last day of lockdown in the ACT. But yeah, our hearts go out to all of the rest of you who are still enduring lockdowns around Australia and around the world. We hope that this will give you a little bit of relief or respite from that today. I'm broadcasting from the beautiful lands of the Ngambri and Ngunnawal peoples, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to extend that respect to any of the traditional custodians of the lands on which you're coming to us from today. For those regulars for our programs, you know that it's always nice for us to find out where you're coming from. So if you'd like to pop in the name of the traditional lands or the places around Australia or the world that you're joining us, we'd love to see that as well. So today, when I asked our curator, Jo, what she would like to do for one of these virtual tours, she's like, just let the people decide. Let's throw it open to chance. And we'll see what comes out. The only parameters that we've given Jo for this tour today is that we are working with self-portraits by female artists. Now, we have quite a big collection of portraits and we have quite a substantial number of self-portraits by female artists. So it's going to be very interesting to see where this tour goes. The element of chance that we're bringing in, I had requested a props department. I really did want a big wheel of fortune wheel that I could, spin and it would land on something. But no, of course, our production budget doesn't extend to that. I have the game of chance basket. So throughout the course of this program, we are going to be pulling female self-portraits out of this very delightful wicker basket. I didn't even have a hat, people, that I could pull out of. But anyway, we'll go with the basket. Without further ado, let's hand over and introduce you to the woman of the moment, Jo Gilmour. Hi, Jo.
Hi, Jill. How are you? It's nice to see you. And thanks to everyone for joining in for this program. I have to say, in Jill's kind of recollection of how this program came about, I am now sort of seriously regretting having thrown this sort of completely to chance. And actually Robert, who's one of our sort of digital wizards who's pulling strings behind the scenes, when I first pitched this idea, he said, it's kind of like virtual Russian roulette. So you can probably imagine how I'm feeling right at this moment. Yeah. So yeah, as Jill said, that's the premise is of the 3,000 odd works in the National Portrait Gallery's collection. There's roughly about 30 of them that are self-portraits by female artists, ranging in date from 1900, I think is the earliest self-portrait by a woman that we've got, and right up until 2005. Not all of them, unfortunately, have been in the mix because, for various different reasons, we can't have them on the website or what have you. But my understanding is that a whole load of them have been posted on Facebook and on Instagram, and you've had the chance to vote for the ones that you'd most like to hear about or that you're most interested in. And Jill will literally just pull the images out of a hat, and then I will have to try and think of something to tell you about them. So this could work. It could also be over in under 10 minutes. So just word of warning. So given that's the premise, we might as well get on with it, Jill. What do you say?
All right, I'm going to shake the basket.
Oh, God. This is
Is the sound effects of the basket shaking coming through on Zoom? I hope so. Anyway, all right, here we go. Random. Pull up one. And the first one we're going to start with, oh, there we go. We were joking about, we hope someone pulls out a hat, pulls a hat out of a hat. We have a self-portrait by Hilda Rix-Nicholas. And oh, Hector's already got the slide up already. That's slide number 21. All right, Jo, what can you tell us about Hilda Rix?
I just want to say that, yeah, we were literally joking about this yesterday, that given that we were proposing to be pulling pictures out of a hat, that we have pulled a hat out of the hat that's a basket is really fantastic. This is a self-portrait by Hilda Rix-Nicholas. It was painted, or drawn rather, it's a drawing, we think made in Paris in about 1913. It's a work that we acquired in 2013, so 100 years after we think it was made, as a result of an exhibition that our former colleague Sarah did for the National Portrait Gallery. It was a massive survey of Hilda's work. It's a really lovely self-portrait for lots of reasons, and there's lots of reasons why a curator loves it. One of the things, and this is like totally nerdy, and I'll be sort of upfront about that, but it's a work that we acquired with its history, its entire history intact, as it were. So it's in curatorial terms, you'd say it's a work that has impeccable provenance. And provenance is kind of a posh word for the history of ownership of a work. And the other thing, I mean, there's all sorts of fabulous stories about Hilda, but it's one of those, I guess, and this is the great thing about self-portraiture, is where you have the artist in terms of their personality, but also their visual style so sort of beautifully combined, I guess. So that's one of the things, one of the number of things that I really love about this work. Hilda Rix-Nicholas, she is Victorian by birth. She was born in Ballarat in the 1880s. In the early 20th century, about 1903, 1904, she relocated to Melbourne with her mum and her sister, and she studied for a few years at the National Gallery of Victoria School, where a hell of a lot of significant Australian artists did their training. We'll no doubt hear about a few more of them as we go through today. And after she'd been at the NGV school for about 3 years, and this is another thing that a lot of women of Hilda's class did in the early 20th century, was she went to Europe. Her mum and her sister Elsie went with her. This is about 1907. They left Victoria. They went to London. Initially, Hilda went to art school in London for a little while, and then after they'd been there a few years, they moved to Paris. And once again, Hilda did further studies in art at a number of academies in Paris. And it was in Paris in 1913 when Hilda made this incredible painting of Elsie, her sister. And the painting's called La Robe Chinoise. And some of you may be familiar with it. It's a beautiful picture of Elsie wearing this gorgeous sort of red embroidered Chinese gown. And in the same portrait, Elsie is also wearing the hat that Hilda's wearing in this particular work. So you could say, obviously had a fascinating costumes and all of that sort of thing. There's I know, for example, the National Gallery of Australia's got this fantastic painting by Hilda Rix-Nicholas of this young girl wearing this incredible sort of 18th century court dress. So she's someone who had a real sort of fascination for costume and what have you. Anyway, so she made this painting of Elsie wearing the Chinese dress and the Chinese headdress. That painting is now in the collection of the Art Gallery of Western Australia. They acquired it in the 1990s, I think. So anyone who's joining us from Perth might be familiar with the painting of Elsie. But then again, there are plenty of occasions when institutions on the East Coast request paintings from elsewhere to have in our exhibitions, and that's exactly what we did with the portrait, in regards to the portrait of Elsie, for the Hilda Rix Nicholas exhibition that we did in 2013. And it was a fantastic show for a lot of reasons. Some of you who are tuning in might remember seeing it, but Sarah, our curator, put it together having consulted with Hilda's granddaughter. Her name's Bronwyn. So just sort of to backtrack a little bit to Paris in 1913, when we believe this drawing was made, when they, Hilda and 1914, they then had to sort of, when war broke out, they went back to London. By 1916, and this is the, kind of one of the very sad things, I guess, about Hilda's life, is that by 1916 she had lost her mum and she had lost her sister, and she was also widowed for the first time. So she married an Australian soldier in London in 1916, and he was killed in action in France just several weeks after they were married. She remained in London until after the war, came back to Australia, eventually settling here permanently in the late 1920s, which is when she remarried. And he had a property south of Bombala, so down near the Victoria, New South Wales border, and Hilda moved to this property. And then, of course, she was still an artist, but she was sort of out in the sticks. So she built herself a studio. And the studio was not only her workspace, it was a place where she stored all of her mementos of the travels that she'd made. And of course, that included the hat that she's wearing in this drawing, and also the hat and the outfit that Elsie was wearing in the painting that she'd made of her. And so when the gallery put together the exhibition of Hilda's work, the beautiful thing, I suppose, was that the whole studio was pretty much as Hilda had left it at the time that I think early 1960s anyway. And between 1961 and when we did the show in 2013, nothing had been disturbed. So everything was still in the studio, including this drawing, and including, of course, the costumes that Hilda had collected over the years. Needless to say, the hat and the costume that Elsie's wearing in her portrait were in the studio. So when we did the exhibition, we were able to reunite the hat and the dress and both portraits. And it was the first time that they'd sort of been displayed together in public. So it was quite a special thing. We had all sorts of wonderful in the show, not least of which was this drawing and the fabulous hat that she's depicted herself in. And I guess sort of, the final nice story about the work is that Bronwyn, Hilda's granddaughter, was so grateful for the gallery having given her grandmother the sort of profile that her work she'd never enjoyed during her lifetime. She was so grateful that she donated the drawing of Hilda to the gallery as a sign of gratitude. So yeah, lots of lovely stories and impeccable provenance relating to the portrait.
Well, I'm glad that one came out of the hat first. Jo, we seem to have we're having a few little issues where you're dropping out every now and again. So everybody who is joining us today, please cross your fingers, and we'll just hope that the signal continues strongly in Jo's part of the world, because there's no way I want to play Russian roulette, okay? So internet gods have to be working for me today, please. We've still got another half an hour, and I cannot talk about female self-portraits for half an hour. Certainly not in the way Jo can. Shall we pull another one out of the hat, Jo?
Might as well. I don't know if it'll work as well as that one, but there we go.
Oh, I don't know. There's some crackers in here. Let's see. All right. Okay. And what do we have? My favorite.
Ah, thank God. I'm really glad.
I think this is actually literally my favorite. This is slide number 4, and we've got Nora Heisen here. So over to you, Jo.
Yeah, this is one of my favourites too, Jill, and it's one of my favourites for all sorts of reasons. Our inaugural director, Andrew Sayers, he wrote an article about this painting, or he mentioned it in something that he wrote, and it's one of those kind of phrases that I always kind of keep going back to sort of help me think about and understand specific works in the collection. And when Andrew talked about this painting, he spoke about how it's small, but it's monumental. And it really, really is. And it is a small work. It's maybe, I don't know, 50 centimeters high, including its frame. And so when it's on the wall and you're looking at it, it's like you're having this wonderful sort of really face-to-face encounter with Nora Heisen. As everyone knows, Nora is an Australian painter. She was born in Hahndorf in South Australia in 1911. Her dad, of course, was the very famous landscape painter Sir Hans Heisen. Her mum, Sally, was an artist too. And I guess it's fair to say that with that sort of pedigree, it's no surprise that Nora became an artist as well. And she's a young age. An oral history that she's done with the National Library Australia, or that she did with the National Library in the 1960s. She talks about how when she was a little girl, they'd all sort of lie down on the floor of their dad's studio and, you know, draw and that sort of thing. So it's no surprise that she became an artist, and no surprise that she was an incredibly talented artist. However, up until about the time that this painting was made, you get the sort of this distinct sense that she was sort of subject to quite a bit of people patronising her, basically, you know, sort of not taking her seriously as an artist in her own right because she was Sir Hans Heisen's daughter. So you sort of get the sense that people were thinking, oh, isn't it cute? You want to be like your daddy kind of thing, and not necessarily taking her right. And Nora made a number of self-portraits throughout her life, and she lived a very long life. She died in 2003. My maths is terrible, so I won't sort of try and figure out what that means in terms of a figure. But, you know, she was a long-lived lady who painted for most of her life. But there's this really fantastic kind of concentration of self-portraits that she made when she's in her early 20s. And those self-portraits are represented in a number of collections. There's a fantastic one in Hobart at Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery. The National Gallery's got a fantastic one. The Art Gallery of New South Wales has got a fantastic one. So has the Art Gallery of South Australia. But those kind of earlier self-portraits, all made sort of 1932, 33, so when she's about 21 years old, are quite distinct from this one, which was made in London in 1934, so just a little bit later. And the earlier self-portraits, I mean, once accomplished paintings, but they're all works that have, I guess, a sort of an element of sort of performance about them. She's really very much portraying herself as the artist, you know, so she'll be holding a palette, or she'll be holding a brush, or she'll be at an easel, or wearing a smock, or sometimes all of those things in the one image, as if she's kind of convincing the viewers of these pictures that, look, here I am, I'm an artist, I'm just as talented as my dad, deal with it. You know, so it's like she's got a point to prove almost with these sort of early. This one, which she made London in 1934, just prior to having made this work, she'd been travelling around Europe with I think one of her sisters and also her mum and dad. But she makes this when she gets to London, and it's her on her own, and this is real now. And it's like she's kind of made this self-portrait at this really beautiful moment in her own sort of career, where she's totally herself. She's got nothing to prove anymore. It's just, you know, it's just her sort of making this self-portrait in this Andrew said, this kind of monument moment in terms of her career. So it's a fabulous little work, little but monumental. And I think the other thing that's really lovely to bear in mind about this work is that whereas all of the other sort of early 1930s self-portraits that she did were all acquired by these public collections pretty much, you know, much earlier. And some of them even, I think the Art Gallery of South Australia's one, they might even have acquired it while she was still at art school, which is, quite extraordinary. This little portrait is one that Nora kept her whole life. Well, pretty much her whole life. So we acquired it in 1999, which is very early on in the National Portrait Gallery's life. It's the first self-portrait by a female artist that we acquired. We purchased it directly from Nora, but 1999, early in our life, but very late in hers. As I say, she died in 2003. So I think it's really quite telling that she kept it all that time. And I don't want to speculate about why that might have been. Maybe she didn't think it was kind of good enough to be in a gallery, or maybe, I like to think, I suppose, that it kind of, spoke to her in a very sort of profound way, that it was very meaningful to her in some way. So yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful self-portrait to have, and one that we like to have on display as much as possible. Although that said, it is about to go on loan to an exhibition in Melbourne. So next time you see it, she'll be at the NGV.
I didn't actually know that we had acquired that from Nora herself. That's a really powerful thing, actually, part of this particular portrait's provenance.
Yeah, and it's another one with impeccable provenance. And I can't say with certain, but I seem to remember someone, might even have been Andrew, telling me that he went to visit Nora at her place in Hunters Hill. That's where she spent a lot of the sort of latter part of her life, in her house in Hunters Hill, and that she had this in a spare bedroom under the bed. So yeah, it's a very moving little work.
Robert might be able to share some of the images. We have some photographs in the collection of Nora at her Hunters Hill home, and so Robert might be able to drop those in the chat, those links, because I think that'll give you a sense of what Nora's home was like when Andrew went to visit. Yeah. Should we pick another work out of the basket?
Why not? Chain smoking too. She chain smoked right up.
Yeah. So in fact, when I look at those photos of Nora, I can almost smell what her house would have smelled like as well. It's like, they're really evocative. So lovely. All right. Here we go. And everybody's responding in the chat, actually, in the same way that I do when I look at this portrait, just seeing her strength and her determination. And it's just wonderful. All right, next one. Oh, here we go. You'll have to tell me about this one, Jo.
Oh, hurrah. That's a very recent acquisition.
Agnes Goodseer. I don't think I know enough about this yet because we've only just acquired it. So slide number 37. Thanks, Hector.
We have only just acquired it, and I mentioned, I think at the outset, that the earliest self-portrait by a female artist that we have is 1900, and it is this one by Agnes Goodseer. She's another Victorian artist, born in 1864 in Portland, I think, Victoria. And her dad was some sort of some sort of high-ranking public official, so they moved around quite a bit. But sort of the point, I suppose, is that some of her very early studies in art, she undertook at a school called the Bendigo School of Mines. So the sort of link between Agnes and Bendigo and us is that Karen Quillen, who's our director now, Karen, a lot of you will probably know, was formerly curator and then the director at the Bendigo Art Gallery. And in 1998, Karen did this major retrospective of Agnes's work. And indeed, that must have been, I suspect I'm right in saying this, probably the first time since the late 1920s when Agnes had an exhibition in Melbourne. That was the show that Karen did at Bendigo Art Gallery in the 1990s. Is probably the first show since 1927 that Agnes had actually had in her country of birth. She's another one of those artists who was very ambitious. I think you get a wonderful sense of this from her self-portrait. It's made in 1900 in Paris. So she's another one of those artists who, sort of got jack of studying in Bendigo and got jack of what was on offer in her home country, and felt that in order to progress her career, she really had to, go to the sort of centres of culture to London and Paris. And it was Paris that Agnes went to, and in her case, where she remained pretty much for the rest of her life, with a couple of exceptions, not the least of which was that sort of 1927 visit back to Australia to have an exhibition. And she also painted a number of commissions while she was here in 1927. But that said, and even though she was someone who was sort of recognised overseas, she's like a lot of Australian artists, and a lot of Australian women artists in particular, in that they never really got, like Hilda Rix-Nicholas in a way, during her lifetime, never really got the recognition in her homeland that she deserved. And so even though, like for example, when she visited Australia in 1927, she was very much someone who was written about in the newspapers, and Australia was very proud of Agnes's achievements. But even so, it wasn't until sort of towards the end of her life, actually, that public museums, including Bendigo, started acquiring examples of her work. And I guess the really incredible thing is that for someone who is now so highly regarded in Australian art historical terms, and someone whose works are really fantastic, she did really fantastic paintings, Agnes. She made a lot of studies, or they're portraits, but they're also studies of a lady called Rachel Dunn, who was Agnes's sort of life companion. Agnes knew her as Cherry, but Cherry appears as the model in a lot of Agnes's works, including a fabulous painting called Girl with Cigarette, which is probably it also belongs to Bendigo Art Gallery, and that's probably the best known of Agnes's works. But when Agnes died in Paris in 1939, it was Cherry that was left with a whole lot of her paintings, and obviously felt a great sense of responsibility towards Agnes's memory and towards this collection of work that she was unexpectedly entrusted with. And so I think one of the main reasons now why there are works by Agnes Woodser in Australian collections is because of Cherry. She, after Agnes's death in 1939, she sent a whole group of Agnes's portraits and other works back to Australia. She sent a group to Darryl Lindsay, who was formerly the director of the National Gallery of Victoria, and she also sent a number of paintings to various different relatives of Agnes's, and she was one of, I think, 10 or 11 children. So, and that's how this work has come to us. So it's another one with really good sort of family provenance. So we acquired this by donation earlier this year. It was in an exhibition called Australian Love Stories earlier this year. So anyone who saw that exhibition might have seen Agnes on display there. And we also had her on display in the same exhibition, one of her very beautiful paintings of Cherry as well. But so this painting originally, when Cherry sent the whole lot of works back to Australia, one of Agnes's brother had this self-portrait, which is one of only very few self-portraits that she made. Just incidentally, I can think of one other. Whether there's any later than that, I'm not sure. I'll have to ask Karen. But yeah, so her brother owned this one, and then it sort of went down through the family to the lady who very kindly donated this to us in sort of March this year. So yeah, it's a fantastic work, and one of those, and like a bit like the Nora Heisen, in that it's a work that she made when she gets to Europe, and she's kind of forging ahead with this career and is not going to let anyone stop her, and it's got this wonderful sort of imperious, quiet confidence about it. Yeah, it's fabulous.
That's a terrific description. One of our amazing regulars who has come along to just about every virtual program we've ever done, Nita in Sweden, thinks or says that she's a relative of Agnes. So I'd be interested to hear from Nita a little bit more about that.
Yeah. And
she also says that one of Agnes's portraits of Cherry with a cigarette is hanging over her mother's bed in France.
Oh. Give Nita my number.
Wow. Oh, brilliant. So we've probably got time for another couple of portraits. Should we dip into the hat again?
Why not?
The not hat. All right, here we go. Oh, sorry, Hector. Hector, our tech and I were bemoaning before the program that this particular work, I'm all for virtual, as you can imagine, working with the digital team. I'm like, yes, you can do everything digitally. You know, people can experience works all over the world, and you know, anyone who can't come to the portrait gallery in person will be able to see everything and experience it all online. There are some works that just don't translate online, I have to admit, and this is one of them. So this is a self-portrait by Shirley Kirby.
Oh, this is another one of my favorites.
So sorry about the terrible slide, everybody, but you really will have to try and come to the portrait gallery in person to see this one in the flesh, because it is stunning.
It is stunning. Sadly, it is another one that if you want to see it, you will have to go to Melbourne.
Or go to Melbourne.
It's another one that's will be included in a project that we're working on currently with our lovely colleagues at the NGB. So it's a self-portrait like no other. It is absolutely wonderful. It is by an artist named Shirley Purdy. She's a Gidja woman from the Kimberley region of Western Australia. And it's a fantastic example of a portrait that doesn't look like a portrait sort of to the naked eye, and certainly not to the European eye, but it's a wonderful example of that tradition for First Nations people, whereby to represent yourself and your story and your identity, it's not at all about, you know, your sort of physical appearance or your physiognomic appearance. That's a very Western, very European construct. It's about all sorts of other things. It's about your country. It's about your spirituality. It's about your history, your stories, your memories, your ancestors' histories and stories and memories, and their countries and their spirituality. And so Shirley has made this absolutely spectacular work, this absolutely spectacular self-portrait, without once sort of reverting to the kind of construct or method that would sort of a non-Indigenous person would think of as a portrait. So it's and it's multiple portraits in one, in a way. This work consists of 36 panels. They're all about 30 centimetres square. And when they're sort of installed in a grid on the wall, the whole thing is about it's about 5 metres wide or something. We did have it installed late last year in Gallery 1. It's an incredibly impressive, beautiful thing, executed in ochres, which Shirley has collected from her own country, and it's a combination of things. So you might see that there's within the sort of screen that Hector's showing us at the moment, there's images of waterholes and trees and mountains, so places of spiritual and cultural significance for Shirley. There's also totemic animals that you can see, and there's also and some of my favourite panels within the overall work are these little kind of stories and memories from her childhood. So there's one, and I don't know if we can see it on screen at the moment, but one of the panels is an image of this old truck, flatbed truck, and Shirley and one of her friends, there it is, it's on the right-hand side. So it's Shirley and a friend and a dog on the back of a truck, and Shirley, who has provided all of in her own wonderful words, all of the little sort of stories that go with each of the individual panels within the self-portrait. She talks about that image with the truck and her friend and the dog on the back as it's a memory of an occasion where they were getting a lift home on the back of a truck with this, you know, some guy, I don't know who the guy driving the truck was, he might have been an uncle or something like that, and they had the uncle's dog on the back of the truck. And Shirley and her friend needed to stop for a call of nature, but they couldn't get the driver's attention to stop the truck so that they could get off and do what they needed to do. So they threw the dog off the back of the truck so that he would stop driving. But instead of like letting them stop to get off and do what they needed to do, he just sort of picked up the dog, put the dog on the back of the truck and drove off. And Shirley and her friend had to had to walk all the rest of the way home. So that's a little sort of mini portrait within the portrait that she calls Two Cheeky Girls. That's one of my favourites. But yeah, there's so many stories. I hope, because when we exhibited this work, we showed it alongside a little film. And we also, like I say, we have all of the sort of text and Shirley's own words about each of the images that make up the portrait. Hopefully that information is available on our website. I'm not sort of saying that with any confidence, but it really is an absolute joy, this work. And actually, I'm going to cheat. I've got the book. Is that okay? There's one of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the image that you can see in the bottom right-hand corner at the moment is an image of a female corroboree. And I'll just sort of tell you, because it seems a very appropriate sort of thing for the sort of day and age that we're living in. I'll tell you what Shirley says about that particular little panel with the corroboree. So it's the painting, Munga Munga, Women's Corroboree, is before I've been born. Mum's mob and my auntie, Dad's sister, and all my family used to dance in Mabel Downs. That's the station in the Kimberley where Shirley grew up. You can see the men are singing with clapping sticks while the women are dancing. Some old people made up this corroboree. This was when we used to dance for good feeling and happy times, which is what we'll all be doing when we come out of lockdown, hopefully.
That's lovely. Brilliant.
Oh,
all right. So yes, when are the dates? Do you know the dates off the top? Again, another Russian roulette question, but the dates off the top of your head for the exhibition at the NGV, in case people in Melbourne are keen to come and see some of our collection?
I won't. It isn't March, but
I think so. Yeah.
So precisely. Yeah.
We might see if it's on the NGV website. We'll see if Robert can drop a link in the chat for people who are curious, and also on Facebook as well. I think people have been asking when that exhibition is going to come down there. So we must have quite a few people from Victoria joining us today again. Hello to all our friends in Victoria. All right, probably the last one out of the hat.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, okay. Another favourite, but quite a somber one to finish on, I'm afraid. Jenny Sages After Jack. Slide number 27, please, Hector. Oh, thank you. You're too quick.
So yeah, you're right. It is a somber portrait, Jill. So Jenny Sages is an absolutely wonderful artist. She is probably best known as a landscape painter, but every now and again she will do a portrait. But when she does a portrait, she has to be really kind of inspired to do it, I suppose. She has to have has to feel a real sort of connection to her subjects, a real sort of reason for doing it. She's not someone who you can just call up and say, here, do me a painting to stick in my boardroom, or, you know, she's not that sort of a portrait painter. We've got a number of wonderful works by Jenny in the collection. The very, very first painting that the gallery purchased was a painting by Jenny of Emily Nawari, the artist, made as a result of a number of meetings and conversations that Jenny had when she decided to become a painter, which she did sort of relatively late in life. She was maybe in her 50s, I think, when Jenny decided she wanted to become a painter full time. She went out to Central Australia and, you know, travelled around a lot and met lots of artists, including Emily Nawari, and made this absolutely beautiful painting of her, which, like I say, is one of the first two acquisitions that the Portrait Gallery ever made, and the very first painting that we purchased. We've got a wonderful portrait that she did of Kate Grenville. There's a few fantastic painting of Helen Garner, actually. Anyway, so she does wonderful portraits, even though it's not her sort of stock in trade, so to speak. But this painting, which is as a self-portrait, obviously, made in 2012, and it's called After Jack. And Jack was Jenny's life partner, her husband, her soulmate. And this painting is made shortly after Jack passed away. It was in the Archibald Prize in 2012. I have a feeling it won the People's Choice Award in the Archibald that year. And the story goes, and we have this from Jenny herself that it came very, 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 very close to being the winner that year. But prior to this painting being exhibited in the Archibald, the year or 2 years before, Jenny's painting of Jack, her husband, was in the Archibald Prize. And that was a painting that she made of Jack not long before he passed away. So there's the beautiful painting called My Jack. That was the name of the portrait of Jack, and this is after Jack. So this is a work that she painted following his passing. If you've seen it in the flesh, or any of Jenny's portraits in the flesh, actually, you'd be aware that she paints on a very, very large scale, which is really interesting because she's a tiny lady. She's a really tiny lady. She's in her late 80s now, so she's quite frail. But I think, you know, one of the really poignant things about her paintings is that Jack used to help her prepare her canvases, or in this case, it's actually painted on composition board. So they're actually quite heavy and big and unwieldy. And not only that, but she uses a process called Encaustic, which is this sort of a kind of a waxy, for want of a better description, substance that you kind of smear all over your support, and then you kind of scratch and carve into it. And Jack, Jenny's husband, used to help her prepare these boards. And I think I'm right in saying that this painting that we're looking at now may be the last work that it's painted on the last board that Jack was able to help her prepare before she passed away. So it's this, you know, it is a terribly sad work, not just from, you can see the anguish in Jenny's face in the work, but when you think of its kind of significance for her, its personal significance for her, not just in terms of what she's portraying here, but the whole sort of, I guess, sort of harking back to her history with Jack, and how much a part of her life he was, and how much a part of her painting life she was too. So it is a very, very moving work. That Love Stories exhibition that I mentioned, where we had the portrait of Agnes Goodser on display, we were actually able to reunite this work with the painting of Jack together, which was pretty special too.
Yeah, it was hard to find a dry eye in the house. I think when you turned that corner in the exhibition, people definitely were very moved by these two images side by side. So
yeah,
brilliant. Well, I think that
went on.
We may have come to the end of our tour for today. Jo, that was incredible. I struggle to remember my kids' names most days, let alone the amount of information that you've been able to just pull out of your memory bank about these incredible portraits. Thank you so much for all of the detail and the info and the stories that you've brought today. Everybody's been, oh, Jo, you're a superstar, has just come through in the comments. So there we go.
I don't know.
I think that's how we all feel. So thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us on Zoom and on Facebook today. We always have a lot of these virtual programs going on, and I really have to send out a massive thanks to everybody who's been joining us during these last, almost 2 years really, since we started ramping up the virtual programs when Australia went into its first lockdown. We've really, I speak on behalf of myself, but also for the rest of the team, we've really had a lot of conversations about just how much we've really valued seeing your faces come into Zoom rooms and seeing your comments on Facebook when we run these programs. It's kept us sane, and it's given us a real passion and enthusiasm for what we do, and seeing all of your responses to what we do has just been incredible. And so thank you very much to our virtual community. We really, really value you joining us every week. And so speaking of that, we do, if you want to jump on our website, portrait.gov.au, we've got Mindfulness Mondays kicking off again on Monday. We've got the regular virtual highlights tours, of course, on Tuesdays at 12:30. And then next week, a special program on Thursday at 12:30, where we're celebrating National Bird Week. So a secret that you may not know about the National Portrait Gallery is that we actually have an incredible number of staff who are really into bird watching, not just bird watching, taking photos of birds. You know, I don't know what it is, people working in portrait galleries and portraits of birds. Maybe there's something there that I don't know. But yes, we have a lot of experts on staff who will be bringing you portraits with birds in them next Thursday at 12:30. So please join us for that one. And until then, hopefully we see you all again online soon. I hope you're all managing to enjoy the relaxing of some lockdown restrictions, and hopefully life is starting to ease a little bit for a lot of you. So thank you once again for joining us, and hopefully see you all again soon.